All right. I'm going to go ahead and get started. It is 33 minutes past the hour, according to my clock. I wanted to welcome you all here. I really appreciate your interest in this session on learning more about ESIP's recently adopted community participation guidelines. Before I share my screen and my slides, there were just a couple things that I wanted to go over. We will have a breakout session. Susan is going to be dividing the group up into several rooms. If you are accessing Zoom via the web browser, as I know some federal employees need to do, you'll just remain in this main room as your breakout room. Breakout room conversations are not recorded, so please feel free to be open and honest. I wanted to actually start out with a land acknowledgement. I am in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, which is, I wanted to acknowledge that I'm presenting today from the original homelands of the Muskogee or Creek Nation. Many Muskogee were removed forcibly by the U.S. government as part of the Trail of Tears. Only half of those removed survived to reach Indian territory. Those who remained have become a distinct tribe unto themselves, the Porch Creek Indians, which is the only federally recognized tribe in the state of Alabama. I make this acknowledgement to honor those who lived here before and to recognize the role my ancestors played in the genocide of those people. As part of our ongoing efforts to be more inclusive and welcoming, we must acknowledge the injustices of the past so that we may assist in restoring justice moving forward. So thank you for being here and thank you for listening to that. It's something that I'm trying to be much more conscious of, to be able to acknowledge where we haven't done so well in the past. So I'm going to share slides. I'm going to share my screen now if I can find the right screen. All righty, you see my screen now with all the things I have open, right? I always hit the wrong button when I'm trying to present slides. There we go. Okay, so you see a title slide now, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right, so I covered some of this. No. I'm sorry, I'm apparently having technical issues here.
What did your cat do?
Driver error. I will also acknowledge my cats very likely will walk across and may type something in chat because they have done that before. Please sign in on the shared notes, and this note-taking is a collaborative effort. Please feel free to add to the notes. Anything you find interesting, these slides are also available through that notes and agenda document. And I will be adding additional links and resources to those slides before posting them on Figshare post-meeting. I also wanted to acknowledge that some of the discussions today we may have may be uncomfortable. Please feel free to take whatever time and space you need, even if it means leaving the session. You're welcome to have your camera on or off at any time. I also wanted to say that we're going to be using, I would like us to agree to use what's called Chatham House rules. While any of us are free to use the information that we share today, particularly when we break out, neither the identity or affiliation of the participants will be revealed. If you wish for particular information not to be shared outside of the session, just let us know, okay? And that applies much more to the breakouts as the main session is being recorded. One trick that I recently learned, if you want to provide notes and comments in the chat, you can change your
You're muted, Denise. You're muted.
Susan muted everybody, including me.
Oh, nice.
That's a way to shut things down.
Yeah, that is a way to shut things down. So I believe we got through Chatham House rules. Just give me a, no, okay. Chatham House rules, I would like us to agree to use this. Essentially, we are all welcome to use the information that we learned in the session today. Try not to use the identity or affiliation of any of the participants. This particularly applies to the breakout rooms, which are not recorded. The main session is being recorded. If you wish for particular information not to be shared outside of the session, just let us know. And like I said, that applies particularly to the breakout rooms as they won't be recorded. If you want to document something in the chat, you can do so anonymously if you would wish, just by changing your Zoom name to just a period. And then we're not going to be able to see who makes a particular comment. If, like I said, if you feel if at any point you need to leave, I am not going to be offended. And also, you don't have to keep your camera on. You can turn your camera off. You can use the chat. Communicate how you're comfortable. Okay. Okay. All right, so really, we're here to talk about the community participation guidelines that ESIP recently adopted. And I really do appreciate all of you attending this. This is something that has been near and dear to my heart for the past 2 years or so. And I've had a really wonderful committee supporting my help on this, as well as incredible support from ESIP staff and other volunteers. Why has ESIP decided to adopt community participation guidelines? We had a code of conduct. What's different between a code of conduct and the community participation guidelines? Code of conduct is often a fairly short statement. It is often difficult to enforce because it tends to be very open-ended and vague. And it does not necessarily address everything that we really want to address. One of the reasons why we're looking at community participation guidelines, I'll switch back and forth between calling them community participation guidelines and CPG. We are kind of in federal land a lot of time, and so acronyms are kind of the thing. Is we want to talk about not only diversity and inclusion, but we also want to talk about equity. And we really, really do need to get to justice. And I personally really love the acronym JEDI. It seems to be, other presentations I've seen on this have been using that term JEDI. So if you hear me say JEDI, it's including the diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as the justice. And so why are we looking at justice as well? This graphic I thought was a really good example of what each of these letters does. So diversity celebrates, increasing number of traditionally excluded or minority voices in a space. Then equity starts celebrating not only that inclusion, but the reduction in harm and changes to systems. Inclusion also awards for the initiatives and credits itself for having a diverse candidate pool, but justice goes that step further of getting rid of the original practices and policies that were having disparate impacts. And so that's one of the things that, one of the things I've appreciated about ESIP is that we are reflective and we try to be proactive on these things. We don't always succeed. And that's one of the places that we're looking for some feedback. All right, so what's covered in the community participation guidelines? It covers what spaces and when these guidelines apply. What sort of behaviors are expected of participants in ESIP. Behaviors that are not going to be tolerated from participants in ESIP spaces and communities. Consequences of that unacceptable behavior, and the reporting process. So when do we use them? This virtual meeting is a time to use these. So working in ESIP spaces, whether they are virtual or physical, when you're working with other ESIP community participants, when you represent ESIP at public events, even if it is not an official ESIP event, if you are representing ESIP, if you're representing ESIP in social media, particularly with official ESIP accounts, and participating in ESIP related forums such as mailing lists, wikis, Slack, and all of that. So we understand that sometimes there are interactions between ESIP community members that are not strictly speaking ESIP. In that case, we'll talk a little bit about that with reporting. You are still welcome to report. It's just that there may not be anything that we can actually, really do other than be aware of the behavior and try and help support culture change around that behavior. So expected behaviors. One of the things I really like about the CPG is that not only it's not just a list of no, don't do this. It is, yes, do this. Again, it gets back to that proactive nature of ESIP that I see. Be respectful, be direct but professional. And I'd like to put a little caveat with that direct. Some cultures actually find very direct communication to be rude and insensitive. So that gets around to appreciating those different perspectives and different ways of communicating. There are ways to still be direct without being rude in those circumstances. And so to be aware of how those communications can be perceived by the recipient. Be inclusive. Do your best to understand different perspectives. Appreciate and accommodate our similarities and differences. And this last one, most important to me, I think, is to lead by example. Try to embody these principles and people tend to adopt behaviors that they see others doing successfully. So, behaviors that will not be tolerated. This is not an all-inclusive list, but these are very specific things that are not tolerated in our community. Violence or threats of violence. I think that should go without saying. That should not be tolerated in any community. Personal attacks. The difference between, criticizing someone's science and criticizing a person is very important. Derogatory language, and understand that derogatory language can shift over time. So if you are told that a particular phrase is considered derogatory, don't take it personally, take note of it, and correct yourself for the future. Apologize and correct yourself for the future. Unwelcome sexual attention or physical contact. Ask before you hug somebody. Even ask before you shake somebody's hand. Any sort of physical touch. Granted, right now, that's not much of an issue since none of us are actually getting to see each other in person. I will admit that was something that I had to work, and I'm still working on to change my behavior. I tend to be a hugger, and I was not always good about asking before hugging, but it is something that because I know that is something I struggle with, I try to be more aware of it. Disruptive behavior, such as heckling a speaker, repeated interruptions that are off topic, excluding particular people or comments or concerns, as well as influencing unacceptable behavior, like encouraging somebody to continue disruptive behavior and things like that. So consequences of unacceptable behavior. It's not going to be tolerated. If you are asked to stop a particular behavior, you are expected to stop it immediately. Reports are going to be, any reports made are going to be promptly and thoroughly investigated to the best of our ability. Violations of these guidelines may result in, And there may be other consequences as well. Being asked to leave an event or online space, either temporarily or for the duration of the event. Being banned from participation in spaces or future events and activities in perpetuity, or other actions as determined necessary by the ESIP leaders involved in the review. Note that depending on how the reporting process goes, which we'll get to in just a minute, you may or may not know the outcome of an investigation. And so that's something that we're still working out the details on. And so we would love a little bit more input on that. As far as reporting, we encourage you to make a report, even if the incident seems minor. And we can talk a little bit about that more kind of when we get into the breakouts into open discussion. Because reports are useful not only to identify and correct individual behaviors, but also improve organizational practices. If we see the same types of things being reported throughout the ESIP community, that means that it is a community issue, not necessarily just an individual issue. So something about our community and our culture had encouraged that sort of practice to continue. So this is where I think it's really important for ESIP to be reflective. If you're uncertain, as long as you're making a good faith report, that you're not reporting in retaliation, there will be no negative consequences to the person making the report. So we suggest that if you are in doubt, go ahead and make a report. Even if nothing comes of it, it can help identify patterns of behavior as well as systemic challenges within ESIP. One of the things that I am very excited about is that ESIP has contracted with a third-party reporting service called Integrity Counts. Why did we do this? We did this so that there are levels of accountability, that this third-party reporting service will not protect any individual within ESIP. There are different ways that you can file a report through Integrity Counts. There's a web interface, which is how I really do suggest if you are going to file a report, go ahead and use the web interface. But there is a phone number, and they have even taken things by fax. All of that information is provided within the CPG, as well as when you go to the main ESIP page, there should be a report button. So you can file your report in a couple different ways, what's called direct reporting. And essentially that means that your name, if me, Denise Hills, is making a report, I file the report, my name is known to me and to everybody who is going to be receiving that report. And I am not excluding anybody within ESIP within ESIP leadership. There is also direct reporting, but with some identities being protected. So you can be anonymous to ESIP overall, or restrict, or certain individuals will never see a report, see a copy of the report. For example, say Tamara did something really horrible to me, which of course I know she's not going to, so that's one of the reasons I'm calling her out as ESIP president. When I file the report, I can say ESIP president. So you can exclude them by name or by role. And so that gives you assurance that if you're filing a report against somebody, that person is not going to be part of the review process. Okay. You can also be completely anonymous when you do this direct report. One of the challenges then is that it is difficult to do any sort of follow-up, either to get clarifying details or to let you know what has happened after the report has been made and investigated. There's also something called proxy reporting. Say I don't even want to touch the Integrity Counts website, right? I could go to an ESIP leader, such as you know, the president, Tamara at this point, or Susan as executive director, make my verbal report to them, and then they could file a report on my behalf so that it is documented. That that is good for helping track repeated patterns of behavior and kind of systemic sorts of things, but there's a lot less that we can do with that proxy reporting. But if that is all you're comfortable doing, please, we encourage you to do it, okay? Like I said, there aren't, and as long as a report is made in good faith, there will not be negative consequences to filing a report. All right. Excellent. So what we're going to do for the next 30 minutes or so is we are going to break out into small groups. And I want you to think about, there is a document for you to track your answers. What I would like you to do when you first get into the breakout room, spend about 2 or 3 minutes without talking to each other. Just document your answers on your own to the questions. And then spend about 15 minutes or so discussing the questions with your breakout group. And then we're going to come back and we're going to report back some of that discussion. So in the last 2 to 3 minutes before we come back, make sure you have designated someone who's going to speak for your group. You know, what points in particular you may want to bring up. Does everyone understand what we're going to be doing now?
Yes, I think so.
Yes. All right. And so see you all back in a few minutes.
I do love the magic when everybody just pops right back in. Welcome back, everyone.
Excellent. I know I had a really wonderful open discussion in my breakout room. I hope everybody else had a relatively positive experience as well. The remainder of our time, I kind of blocked out about 15 minutes or so for report out from our breakouts. Give each group a little bit of time. Feel free to continue to add comments to that document as you think of them. I know I told my group I am terrible at talking and typing at the same time. So sometimes, and I see Ben laughing at that because he knows that I'm horrible at that. So please continue to add to those notes as you think of things, as well as to kind of our shared notes. So I've kind of set aside a little bit of time right now to do kind of a little bit of a report out, and then I've really left the rest of the time as open discussion where either we can really dive into some of these particular points, or if there's or if you have like a very specific question, or if you have an example scenario about whether the CPG covers this. But let's start kind of just with a brief report out, and we're going to go. Hopefully you all remember your breakout room numbers. If we could have someone from breakout room 1.
I'll speak for breakout room 1.
Okay.
So we had a really great discussion in our group. Some of the biggest impressions we had were that the accountability aspect of the CPG is great, and that it just opens a much better space for equity, and that the guidelines are very well articulated, which is going to be great for using it as a measuring stick and saying like this is acceptable versus this isn't, and having that written down can be very useful in our spaces. Some of the challenges we highlighted were that there hasn't been much information about how the reports are handled yet, just because there hasn't been a report yet, which is good, but also that some people may violate the guidelines without realizing it. And that's when we need to react with compassion and say, okay, maybe this person didn't mean this. And so how do we move forward and correct firmly enough that it doesn't happen again, but also say like, okay, we recognize you didn't mean to do this. One of the suggestions that we had thought of was that in the first few years, an annual survey to assess the gaps between violations reported and incidents that occurred could be really helpful. So just sending out a survey saying, have you experienced any of these things this year in an ESIP space? And if the numbers that you're getting from that survey aren't matching up with what is reported, maybe that can educate the way that this CPG is pushed in the community. So like there needs to be more education behind it, or maybe it's working just as it was supposed to. And also offering a bystander intervention training in addition to the CPG could be really helpful. So empowering your community members to say, okay, I'm witnessing an incident. What do I do? How do I step in and protect the people that are being hurt? So yeah, super grateful for this opportunity. Really glad to see that the CPG is being implemented. So.
Okay, great. Group 2, that was my group. We didn't actually designate someone who was going to speak. Does one of the people want to volunteer? You're all muted. If none of the three of you want to, I will be happy to sum up what we talked about.
Yeah, take the lead, Denise.
Yeah, go for it. Oh, you want me to do it? Or
Yeah.
Okay. We started out talking a little bit about why we put these in place and kind of the purpose of them. And while I think it might be articulated within the CPG, I don't think I made that particularly clear in my presentation, but I think also that means that we need to make that a bit more prominent as to why we decided to go this route. Similar to the first group, we talked about it's nice to kind of that that balance between do this but don't do this. We did talk a little bit about reporting. We didn't talk about specifically bystander intervention, but additional training for how to address things in the moment, which essentially is bystander intervention training, as well as what sorts of additional roles and responsibilities ESIP leaders may have. We also had a really good discussion about the role of justice and where that fits in with the often when we think about justice, there are specific groups or agencies that kind of address the justice aspects of these things, and what the role of ESIP and or the earth science community as a whole have in bringing about justice. And we thought that might be a really good future direction to have further discussion on that topic and those issues. Let's see, what else? We also discussed that we thought that it might be a really good thing to open up the CPG a little bit more explicitly for public comment, including specific wordsmithing. For example, Erica in the main chat before we went into breakout had already pointed out a phrase that may warrant further consideration about whether all sexual attention versus unwanted sexual attention, kind of what different connotations those two phrases have, and what sort of role, where we should fall. We had some discussion about the be direct and be respectful, because being respectful can often, the term be respectful can be used to shut down voices. The example that was brought up is, the angry Black woman. is often told to be respectful, but the only way that she is heard is in her strong voice. So kind of tweaking that a little bit, and I had already mentioned about directness can be seen as rudeness and not being respectful, and so considering how that is. So some more explanation on some of these terms, and as well as wordsmithing. So opening it up more explicitly to to ESIP community input. Was there anything big that I missed from our group that you're comfortable bringing up?
This group only brought up big things, so.
It was a really great discussion, and I really appreciate everybody being so open and honest. That's how we make progress.
And
All
can
right.
I also add to that? Sorry, Arika.
Yes, go for it.
Yeah, just to add to that too, in addition to just that public comment, I think being clear about what the process is to how this is developed so that it represents the shared values of the ESIP community. Recognizing that's also very porous, that people kind of come in and out, but so making it clear, like, what does that process look like to developing this, and whose voices are included in that, and so making that very public. So the process of it, and so that public comment is included, but other ways, and so it's not just public comment, but there's like a variety of ways that people can participate and add their comments.
Yeah. Thank you so much. All right, group 3.
I think that's me. I got voted at the last minute, but I had a great group too. And yeah, we had a really wide-ranging and helpful discussion too. And so in terms of the initial impressions of the CPG, it was, universally people thought it was great, well organized, timely. They like the positive focus on the guidelines that you mentioned before, what to do rather than, pointing fingers at what not to do. But then also the other part that we liked was the fact that there's a follow through. It's not just this statement that you put out and say, here are our guidelines. There's actually, here's what you can do if the community guidelines aren't being followed. So that was pointed out by our group. In terms of opportunities and challenges, that's where we spent quite a bit of time. And let's see, I'm going to try to summarize some of the big points. Which are, a lot of times these diversity, equity, inclusion is about a power, who has power and who doesn't kind of thing. And so we looked at it in the setting of a session where somebody, a pretty traditional person, gets up and presents their ideas, and then somebody else who may be new or may not have the confidence that their ideas are valuable gets kind of shut down, in some ways. And so we recognize the need for very strong facilitation, and but we also recognize that this is a culture change that takes a lot of time. And so I thought one of the good ideas that was brought up was having a person that's particularly focused on the dynamics of the room and how we can be more inclusive, because the facilitator, him or herself, has a big job just trying to keep the discussion focused on target. But this could also be done through training of the facilitators, to be aware of this. But anyway, we recognize that some of these microaggressions, or whatever you want to call them, happen in a session setting, and so that was kind of a key area to address. Let's see, what else did we talk about? Well, also the very difficult parts about this, where there's sensitivities that that are brought up. It's hard to do that in the first place. And then, really to figure out what exactly just happened, you have to explore both sides of what was going on, and just the complexity of that in terms of implementing solutions. But that's covered in the steps. But of course, we're going to find complexities there. Let's see what else we talked about. Let's see. Yeah, and again, however we can promote these guidelines, so that they're kind of in the consciousness of the ESIP participants, whatever that takes is important, because you have to be aware of them. You know, people have to be aware of them the whole time. And then as far as implementation, I hinted a little bit about this need for facilitation training, and perhaps somebody to particularly focus on the larger sessions on this dynamic. And then, you know, having non-threatening ways to approach people that haven't that have touched or violated the guidelines was also something that we brought up. Let me see if there's anything else. Again, you know, informing the members about the CPG upfront, introducing them at every opportunity, the beginnings of sessions, etc., just to make it sort of something that we can do without having to focus so deeply on it. Was kind of the guidance. Anybody from my group have things that I forgot that need to be added?
One thing that I thought I loved how it sort of was a stone soup of everyone brought a different aspect of this to it. That yes, there are individuals who quite willfully can be violating these guidelines, but especially in such a loving community as ESIP, there's a lot of times that there are people who really are unaware of their behavior, and what I think an aggressive approach to that can be a real turnoff and drive people away. And being able to have, you know, almost a truth and reconciliation process of, you're not a bad person. This behavior that, you know, came from your childhood has this effect, or maybe there was a misunderstanding. Someone said something meaning one way, but it was interpreted another way by the other person. And so really having a loving process that you can kind of surface that, and everyone can grow and learn from it.
Anyone else? Okay, that's what we have. Thanks. You're muted, Denise.
Yep, I didn't click fast enough. I was busy typing in the chat. So that was group 3. Group 4?
Rob or Christina, does either of you want to do the summary? Christina? I'm not trying to volunteer you, but you can take it away, I'm sure.
Yes, I am. I was taking notes, so I can swap over to this. Unless I've lost it. All right, there it is. Okay, so. All right, I'm not sure where the thing went.
You want me to go ahead and pick it up?
That would be great. I seem to have missed the window.
So for group 4, we thought that the CPG was fairly complete, at least in kind of an overall sense. Seemed to be fairly balanced in the guidelines it was presenting. But we did identify a lot of things that that could be improved or clarified or expanded on. As far as the potential opportunities go, we want to try to emphasize that in attending professional events, we want the attendees to look at interactions as being on a professional level and less on a personal level. Even though we're all interacting with people that we may or may not know, delving right into, trying to delve into someone else's personal life or their characteristics or whatnot can kind of get you into a bad situation. So we have to remember that we're all professional peers and that the basis of our interaction is a professional basis. We want to make sure that we want to set a level playing field for all attendees. And one thing that was mentioned is we want to try to improve and enhance the way we onboard new attendees. We don't want them to feel like they don't belong. We want quite the opposite. We want them to feel included and even have some contacts among the attendees who could actually be someone that person trusts, that they can go to with questions and to feel like they're truly a part of things. We want to avoid the imposter syndrome of new attendees. We also want to have the CPG be something that every attendee doesn't just dismiss out of hand, but that they actually read and ask themselves honestly whether any of those aspects really apply to them, and to give themselves an examination of their own behaviors and tendencies, to basically be honest with themselves that they're going to adhere to those guidelines. And the outcome of fostering inclusive interactions, it helps to remove the social frictions that gets in the way of productivity and communicating and learning science. And so there's a real benefit to science in basically making things as inclusive and accepting as possible. So I think the emphasis that we have on improvement is we want to have good communication among the different individuals in terms of inclusiveness. Communication being round trip in terms of any corrective action or intervention. And we think that there may be some documents out there that can help expand on best practices. I also think that because we're giving technical presentation more often than not, we have to be really careful of the terms that we use in our presentation that maybe have been around for a long time, but now are currently becoming, it's very evident how offensive they are to certain groups. And so we have to recheck what has been common language in the past. That's really kind of the summary, I think.
Great points. I am learning so much. We covered a lot in our discussions developing the CPG, but this has always meant to be a living document. So I am very appreciative. Did we have one more group, or was that it? Or was that the last group?
Looks like that was the last one.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to make sure that we kind of hit everybody there. So we have about 15 minutes left in the session. I did kind of want to open that up to any other general questions, comments, concerns. Susan actually just put a really great question in the chat, and other things. When you were hearing from the other groups, was there anything that you still feel might be missing from the discussion, or you came up with another brilliant idea of how to improve this? Any of that?
And I had that I kind of raised to my group was, I'm excited to see the roughly 20 people that are here. But how do we, I feel like you guys are the choir and you get it. How do we, and I would just love your feedback, how do we best get this out more broadly? It's interesting, we talked about how the CPG are linked in when you register, but how many people click through and read them there? I mean, Patty just told me we had 13 people register since 11 o'clock. I guarantee you those people that are just trying to find the Zoom link are not reading it. Thoughts on how we best infuse it into the community? I have some, but I'm curious to get your thoughts. Tamara.
So one of the things I talked about in our group is the possibility that when you onboard new leadership, so with respect to the different clusters or committees, that a significant piece of that is to make them very aware of the content of those guidelines. And then the training for how to keep an eye out as they lead their groups through their discussions and activities during the course of the year, so that they become aware of it. And if they see something that's an issue, then they can bring it up. And depending on the context, it could be a general bringing it up, or it could be going to a specific person and saying you may not have intended this, but this was, taken the wrong way. And this is because, and here are the guidelines, that might help you think about that more. So I think maybe through the leadership, since we have such a distributed leadership with all these ESIP activities, that might be a way of getting it out without depending on people reading it when they register.
If I could add to, I think one other thing is, instead of always, like, I said in my group, I always look at the community guidelines or code of conduct, whatever it is. I always want to know if a community has one, for one thing, and then I'll take a look at them. But I think, it would be important also to think, like, instead of saying like, oh, go look at the guidelines to look at all this important information, but maybe starting off, like, kind of enculturating it into the community by, when you have an opportunity publicly to speak to everyone, it's always, these are our values and this is what's important. These are the values that, and make it simple, right? I don't know if the values of ESIP, I can't remember if they're simple or not, but be like, these are our values of ESIP. This is what's really important to us. This is what guides our community and why we're all here. And if you want more information, we also have all this other great stuff, but just kind of like, what's the high level stuff, and just constantly always communicating that. I think, and that also, not only does it communicate it, but it also demonstrates ESIP's commitment to those values and how that really guides, hopefully it does guide all the decision-making that happens in ESIP.
That's a great point. We've had values, I think, for a fairly long time, but then we added the CPG. So I think that it's a really good time for us to go back and look and see, how do those dovetail? And then how can we use them to reinforce each other? That's a really good point. I see Ethan has his hands up, Marion, and then Ben.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think introducing our values and these guidelines at every meeting and discussing them a little bit seems really important. And we mentioned it in our breakout group. I'm not sure if it came out in the larger group, is kind of reminding everyone that we all have biases and we all have styles of discussion, and that they come across differently to different people, and we need to be aware of that, and just reminding and being aware in the moment of that, I think could be really helpful too.
Marion?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off of something Ethan said, and it came up in our group as well, that also reminding people that if there is a violation and they didn't mean to, but we approach them with compassion and say, like, this is a problem, and remind them, if there is a defensive response to that, if their immediate reaction is to get defensive, that maybe there's something to explore there. That means that there's more self-reflection necessary if you're getting defensive about something. And so in addition to sharing the guidelines, maybe including that piece and say, like, don't react immediately, maybe just take a step back and think about what the person is saying to you when they share this information.
I was with a group a couple of weeks ago where that came up. It was mostly women and two men, and one of the men had a reaction, and I love how the women said, "Oh, that sounds like a trigger for you. I guess you should really be looking into that." So I think maybe when I wanted to be similar to what's already been said, but we don't want to overload each session at these meetings. The land acknowledgement statement, I think, really does bring a lot. And if we had a fantastic slide that really encapsulate these community participation guidelines, that's shown at the beginning of every session, it's just a brief moment of remember why we're here and how we've agreed to behave. We don't want to overload the beginning of each session, but it could be good.
I will take that challenge, and I will try and get something for tomorrow's plenary, which is midday, I think. We'll see if we can get something in there. I will be honest with you, I was nervous about doing my first ever land acknowledgement and not screwing it up. And so all my attention was focused there. And afterwards I went, oh, the CPG, I should have mentioned that more. So we'll see if we can get that in tomorrow.
Susan, we can bounce some stuff back and forth.
It's entirely appropriate.
Looks like Robert Ravado has his hand up now.
Oh, thanks. I think the points mentioned earlier were really great. The topics about compassion, as well as core values. A lot of organizations adopt core values, including the military and things like that, and that goes a long way on an individual basis, psychologically, to focus on those key terms. And so I think that's really great. Another topic I think that would be really helpful, or at least to consider, would be collective, and I mentioned this in our group sessions, collective sort of potential violations. So often guidelines are focused on individual behaviors or actions, but at times there are situations in which more than one person collectively are violating, either intentionally or otherwise. And this can get really complex. So in my own experiences, I've seen a lot of, in the standards organization bodies, for instance, I've seen a lot of intentional abuse of the system in order to push an agenda or get a product accepted and things like that. And this can be very, very subtle. But that's, I think, this sort of collective violation, these collective impropriety are things that could be incorporated in community guidelines, or should at least be considered. I think it would be helpful.
That's a really great point. I know at the start of the CBG, we do state that it applies to individuals as well as kind of collective, but it might need, we might need to examine this and look to see if we need to be even a little bit more explicit about that, because I think that as individuals, we might be getting better, but you're right that sometimes, and it may even be unconscious as part of a group too. So I think that's a really good point.
Can I also add something about that? I've just been thinking about like I guess when you start talking about the diversity and inclusion aspect of it, is to always kind of lean towards the opt-in aspect of it, especially when driving sort of the DEI sort of agenda. I think what happens sometimes, you lean a little bit too much into it, where it starts to become like, you need to do this and this and this if you're going to be woke, and then I think that can also backfire and make people feel very uncomfortable, so just, and then maybe also have these unintended consequences of being like, of kind of requiring or making it sound like you must do these things, but it actually makes people feel very uncomfortable. So make it more like like an invitation. If you would like to, please do share your pronouns if you do feel comfortable with that, rather than everybody must share your pronouns. And then what that leads to is making some people feel very uncomfortable or feeling like you're outing people. You know what I mean? So it's like, so these, like, as these new sort of ideas come up that are intended to be helping move us forward in these directions, just always try to lean towards the opt-in invitation, I think.
Okay. We have about 5 more minutes before the break. I would like to, we tried to document some key takeaways from this session, and I would like us as a group to come up with kind of 3 key takeaways that we can then document in about this session. So feel free to leap up and suggest.
I'm not going to articulate it real well, but I think that the application of the guidelines, not just to individuals, but to group or collective conversations is a key takeaway.
I definitely heard training for leadership for cluster and committee leaders, board staff, so that we can infuse it into each of the small group discussions that we have. But then I've also heard, bystander training for others that might be interested. Ken, to your question in the chat about integrity counts on the CPG, Denise may know the answer to that better than I am. I'm still trying to figure it out personally. I don't know that you need an individual account with integrity counts. ESIP has one. And I still have to look into some of the mechanisms.
Right. So Ken, I will follow up with you as well afterwards, because as incoming ESIP president, you will end up with an account.
I actually have one. I mean, it will transfer from me to, so I did go through last year the training.
Right.
So
And I did as governance chair as well. So Bill will get that, but we probably need a refresher training. To make a report, you do not need to make an account at Integrity Counts. The people who need accounts are the ones who might be reviewing reports. So ESIP staff, ESIP president, ESIP treasurer, ESIP governance chair. I don't recall if VP was on there or not. No. I didn't think it was, but you know.
I think there were, if I don't remember exactly, I have to check this, but I think there were alternatives. So if for example, I was the subject of a report, it would not go to me, but I think that there may be an alternative person that it goes to, in addition to the other people that it might officially go to.
Yeah, but Ken, I'll definitely follow up with you more afterwards. One more key takeaway. So
I think a key takeaway would be something that most everybody's been touching on here, and that is how to handle bad behavior. Who really should have maybe some training that we know will always be present at every session or meeting. Somebody who's qualified to recognize it and then do the appropriate response. So, you know, and along with that is letting people know that because they are participating in these venues, that might happen. Nobody likes to be surprised and embarrassed.
Yeah. Yes, go for it,
Possibly, to add on that, something that kind of came out of my group's discussion was even trying to emphasize more, this is what you should do. These are good practices. These are strategies that you can employ to avoid issues. Like focusing more on best practices or strategies that have worked in other places than just, you know, this is what you do with bad people, and like getting out of that mentality.
So
I would second that too. I think it's like making this kind of unique, like being very thoughtful, right? Then rather than just like kind of transplanting, this is how other communities do it, we're just going to do it exactly the same way. That it's really making this ESIP's own and responding to the unique challenges of the ESIP community, and you know, and the values and the, you know, this kind of shared intention that's within this community. And I think one of my main takeaways from this is just seeing, I'm glad to see all these people here this session, that this is obviously something that's very important to a lot of us, and we all come from lots of different places, and to see kind of the, you know, we're representing a lot of different places and a lot of different types of perspectives, and I think that to me is like, I feel very, like, I'm very happy to see that.
Yeah, we had some good competition. So I'm incredibly pleased with this turnout. I will try to synthesize these comments here into the three main points. I think Arika kind of touched on what I was going to add, was that connection of ESIP's core values to the CPG, as well as the implementation of the CPG and how we address it. And it kind of wraps into, you know, that you know, adopting leading practices, treating people with compassion first, as opposed to you know, looking immediately towards retribution. You know, looking more towards restitution rather than retribution. But I really appreciate everybody being so open and honest. I know that it's not always easy. I know it's not always easy to reflect on your own role in some of this, but I'm really pleased at how this has been coming. Bill Tang is going to be the governance chair and will be kind of shepherding a lot of this, but I suspect as VP, I will still be involved in this because it has become very near and dear to my heart. ESIP is a very important thing to me, and its core values align with my core values, which is why it's so important to me. Feel free to reach out to me or or to Bill or Ben or Bob Downs, who have all served on the governance committee, as well as to any ESIP staff. If you have other comments, questions, concerns, suggestions, and how we can keep moving this forward. So thank you. Go enjoy your break.
And I will say this coffee break actually has an activity. So kind of, while you could just go and do something else and check your email, y'all told us that you wanted more connections, more time to talk with people, more chances to meet new people. So we've given you actually a little bit of a break, 15 minutes, go grab a cup of coffee, a soda, a glass of water, whatever you need to do, and then join us in the coffee break, which you can access in the plenary and breakout room. It'll be coffee break at 3:15. It should be fun. It's a new technology. I'm curious to know what you guys think of it. So see you in a little bit.